Okay.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Let's do this thing. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Reese Peacock. I'm the curatorial assistant here at the Corning Museum of Glass. I am at my apartment right now. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm here to moderate a conversation with the contributing artist of She Bends Redefining Neon Legacy, which will be on view at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma until October 29th of 2023. Before we begin, I would like to ground our discussion with a land acknowledgement. She Bends Redefining Neon Legacy is on view at the Museum of Glass, located on the ancestral homeland of the Puyallup tribe and the Coast Salish peoples, who precede the establishment of the museum, Washington State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the original stewards of this land and recognize that a land acknowledgement is only one small step. All right, well, thank you for being here, artists. We're just going to get right into it. Neon production is historically rooted in the master-apprentice trade. In the field's traditional narrative, we learned that it is predominantly white and male. And keeping that traditional narrative in mind, what is the legacy or legacies you are all redefining by participating in She Bends Redefining Neon Legacy?
I think, Meryl, do you want to go first because you're on mute?
You may take it away.
Okay. I think I have a unique insight into the legacy of neon, as I am the biggest outsider of neon in this crew. I think that you can boil down legacy to impact, and so like what impact has neon had on the public or landscapes or people. And it's had a very predominantly capitalistic impact, right? It's been a tool for that, an agent for that. And like most capitalistic tools, it's benefited, it's had a beneficial impact for the white, the hetero male, the wealthy. And it's had a negative impact for, any identity or land outside of that. And so for me, redefining neon legacy was kind of an act of hope, to support and present neon that's being made and celebrates and illuminates, if you will, narratives that are outside of what has historically been shown in neon, and narratives from people who identify as women or gender nonconforming, people of color, and to really like make space in the world for neon like that, because that space is power. And by presenting the kind of like pedagogical lineage of neon, give that space and power to constructing kind of a new and inclusive legacy for neon. So a forward-thinking legacy. And hopefully we get into the specifics of the artwork that's in the show and kind of the legacies that they promote, because I think that that's really important here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if at any point in this conversation, any of you want to speak specifically to your piece or another individual's piece to exemplify what you're saying, that's more than welcome. Thank you, Kelsey. Is anyone else wanting to contribute to that question or weigh in on what Kelsey just said?
This case,
yeah, I can go. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because I think with this show, we kind of all bring our own flair of teaching and our different styles together. But I think what we're sharing is that, this is a craft for everybody. It's not a secret anymore, and I think that just kind of opening that portal to language and exploring what hasn't been figured out in this medium yet is like a group activity. So it's really fun to do that with everybody and to have this framework that supports this kind of passed down tradition, at least kind of vocally, right? When I'm teaching in the lab, I'm dancing with the fire, you're showing someone how to hold something in like the most awkward way possible, but it's the best for the piece and it'll get you a good seal on that electrode, so it kind of becomes this kinesthetic practice or some other kind of proprioceptive, like knowledge sharing in person in the lab, which I think is really great. So I think a lot of the legacy that we end up wanting to share or thinking is important to keep going is like how we're treating each other and how we're developing interest into the medium further and deeper. I ramble. I go on. So.
No, it's okay. Thanks, Casey. I actually have one quick follow-up question for you. You used the term proprioceptive and kinesthetic. Can you just really quick summarize what you mean by those terms and how they might be related, or important to the practice of neon bending?
Yeah, totally. So kinesthetic is just like motion and body kinesthetic. And proprioceptive is being in your body and being aware of your presence and being able to like feel your limbs out in space. So you're absorbing your world through the space around you. And so much of that is not necessarily like analytic, a mind-based kind of approach. So much of it is just muscle memory. I like to think about it as 50% dreaming and 50% muscle memory, because I mean like equal parts,
That's beautiful. Thank you, Casey.
I love that idea too, Casey, because I think it ties really well into the like teacher apprentice style that you have to learn neon. And there's like a very tangible connection there between not only your like teacher and your students, but like also with your body and like having to work with the material too in space, which is really interesting.
I'd like to chime in a little bit about legacy and just from the curatorial standpoint. I think it was really important to do this show for both Kelsey and I because, neon has historically occupied a very niche position within the glass world, and therefore the larger craft conversation. And because of its commercial applications, it can be really challenging to alter the public's perception of it as solely an advertising tool. And it's also a relatively new craft. So compared to other crafts in our, human history, it has a much smaller story arc compared to other disciplines. So I kind of feel like because of that, neon hasn't really established a consistent recognition within the contemporary glass space, let alone fine art spaces. And I think that this show is super important because educators are contributing a very conceptual approach to the medium that's outside the commercial applications, right? And are rearing generations of artists who are kind of departing from that approach and doing weird shit, and if it's going to be any group of people who pushes this medium towards recognition in those fields, pushing the boundaries and doing things outside of that commercial connotation, it's going to be people who have a hand in it and who are making it themselves. So the combination between skills practice and this, essence and lore education around the medium is a really unique combination, I think, nowadays with neon. It's not historically taught that way, I don't think. And these educators and their approaches have created a more accepting and accessible space for many young artists of different backgrounds and experiences. So that's why it was important for us to do the show. And I feel like that's kind of, the impact that's happening right now.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And I would like to just highlight that, again, as an outsider perspective, that when we think of other crafts, like, for example, photography, right, that started in the 18th century, it was really used as a tool for of craft, a commercial craft, a tool of like manifest destiny, right? Like it was this kind of it was a big agent of a larger machine, and it was artists. And this is a very small history of photography, but artists like Ansel Adams that in San Francisco started art classes, right, at SFAI, San Francisco Art Institute, to really develop pedagogy, these like teaching methodologies that treated it more as a fine art. And today we look at photography and people wouldn't second guess it as a fine art form, right? If anything, we've completely devalued the notion of it as a objective form, right, of relaying reality, and it's almost only used as a subjective tool. And so being able to kind of live through and be a very small part of that kind of evolution of neon as a commercial tool to a very subjective and fine art tool is humbling and really exciting.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to weigh in? What legacies are we dismantling? Yeah,
I want to further the points made of like transforming the craft into fine art and then diversifying it literally and metaphorically. Like I was brought into neon through fine arts. So there was like that first barrier of not going to a traditional sign shop for commercial reasons, but approaching neon as a sculpture, as portraiture, as another way to make image or illustration. And then further diversifying it literally, like putting it into the hands of queer people of color, allowing them to create these stories in a medium that is literally empowering and bringing light into everybody's identities and stories that they want to share. Yeah, it's just totally empowering to like share this medium amongst people that would have never had the access to it in the first place.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate what you just said, Danielle, about like this idea of sharing knowledge, sharing the craft is empowering. And I hope that we can touch more upon that as we have this conversation. Anyone else, legacies that you feel like you are redefining, dismantling, or maybe subverting even, or juxtaposing all of the things? Sarah, Blood, and Steph, I know you both teach in many, academic spaces, shop spaces. So I'd be curious to hear your input on that, like as far as what it means to be teaching neon bending and light construction in these sorts of spaces. Victoria, you as well. I know you're teaching. And Casey.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what has been said previously. I guess I'll speak a little bit about my approach to teaching. I specifically start off heavily focused on technique and then push forward with individual ideas. That is the way I teach. I know that everyone teaches so differently, but it is really important for me for everyone in the class to have a strong technical foundation. And then I kind of let them explore and push through the projects the way they can really envision. And that's when I see magic happen. Once people have those tools in my classes, the way I see it, once people have those tools, they can really just push forward with any of their individual ideas, bring their own background, their own interests, anything that they're exploring or researching into the art practice. And that's always really, really exciting to see. It's just, there's this Yiddish word nachas, and it's like this ultimate pride in somebody else succeeding. And that's what I feel all the time teaching. It's like, it's just like my heart growing whenever I see someone just like explode with success once they make a piece that's all theirs. So I get really excited about it. And the reason I push technique so hard at the beginning of class is because I really want them to take ownership of the making process and really see it through from start to finish. I really like having the least amount of my hand in whatever a student is creating. And that's always different, you know, if we're teaching a one-day workshop compared to like a week-long intensive with someone, or a class that spans an entire semester. There's always such a different approach to teaching and how much people can do on their own. But for longer classes, that's the most exciting thing for me to see, just everyone pushing themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
Stephanie really touches on something important here about the technical aspect of neon making, because you can do other crafts and other arts. Like you can make a really bad painting and it's still a painting. You can make a stool with different sized legs and you can still sit on it or put a plant on it or something. It's still a stool. But if you have a tube and if you're making neon and you don't have that perfect seal, and if you don't have that really well executed processing, you've got nothing. You've just got scrap. And so having like going really hard and heavy on technique, at least initially, is crucial. And I think maybe most of us approach it in that way, because students having ownership of the making and having a tacit knowledge not only kind of reinforces the importance of technique and how precise they have to be, but also that's where the ideas come and that's where the magic happens. And when you know the boundaries, you can push against them.
Great. Thank you. I think that's actually a really great segue into the next question that I prepared. So it is, sorry, I'm getting my document up. One of the contextual roots in this exhibition is this idea of passing the torch. Can we talk about the intentionality within the ritual of passing the torch? And how does this ritual create and uplift a neon community that you all want to see and participate in? Sure, Sarah, go for it.
Can I go for it? Okay, cool. So I have a little bit of a different learning experience in as much as I did my artistic education in the UK, where there is little to no access to neon. Neon is currently on the Crafts Council's endangered crafts list. And I believe at last count, there was 35 or 36 people in the whole of the United Kingdom making neon. That's not easy to access. And I had a really hard time accessing that and had to go and do workshops initially in Istanbul and then in Seattle to access that. And even after having those initial classes, then going back to the UK and trying to engage with the sign writers who were there and making, it was almost impenetrable because people didn't want to share the secrets. And I think one of the most important things with my teaching, one of the things that it's one of my priorities, is that there are no secrets. There are no secrets. This is how it's done. This is a document of everywhere you can go to get the tools so that you can take this away and you can do this yourself. I think sharing information, neon is not something you stumble across like in a craft market and you go, oh, that's great, I can go and take this class. Or it's not something you get to do at like primary school or any other way. You have to be very intentional in accessing it. So I think the most we can do is like give the information freely and generously. And
I think that benefits the survival of the craft as well. I mean, I'm sure all of us have seen, for the most part, declines in suppliers and options for hardware and power supplies. And, you know, the fewer people that have access to the trade, the worse off it's going to be for us and for the future of what we do. So, and I love that, Sarah, because I bought a torch from Sarah. So Sarah passed me the torch.
Nice.
But yeah, I that's a wonderful philosophy. And I think anyone who is doing otherwise is really harming the industry as a whole. Because really we need to be inviting and we need to be adding people to the table, you know, not just artists, but sign makers and engineers. I mean, there hasn't been innovation in our industry since the 80s, you know? I mean, there's like one, you know, Tech 22 is like the newest thing that we have, and thank God for them, but like we need more people like that. So I think it's also not just about the arts, it's getting people, you know, excited about the medium and the engineering behind it and the possibilities, and yeah.
Yeah, I think there are cool, like a lot of cool, like connecting theories right now or concepts that have been thrown around. One is like the idea of like legacy and that not being in the past, right? Like we're not retroactively looking at what the legacy of neon was, because like we still have the opportunity for that legacy to be redefined and evolve. And I think that was a very big instigator for Meryl and I putting this show together, of exhibiting both teachers, teaching artists who are teachers, and their students who are also teachers in their own right. And that kind of being a transparent concept within the exhibition, that like there is a lineage, right? And you can kind of see threads of material or concept execution, handling of the medium within that lineage. And that isn't something that should be gatekept or behind closed doors, but is a really beautiful part of the craft and of the medium, and an important part of its evolving legacy and its history going forward, its impact going forward.
I think I also want to chime in here and say, just while we're on the topic of gatekeeping, that another thought in my head going into this show and kind of feeling the importance of it is that there are a lot of like kind of contentious conversation amongst, you know, in the industry around who should be teaching and whether or not they have a right to teach. And I think that is in and of itself also, I mean, it is a form of gatekeeping. You're gatekeeping the teaching, the actual teaching of the craft. And if you know, this notion that if you don't have enough experience making it, that you shouldn't be teaching it. And so I felt it was really important to show artists who, while they might not be, you know, teaching journeyman sign makers perpetually, they're still creating and fostering a future for this trade that gets people super duper excited about what's next and what's to come. So yeah, I'll end it there.
I want to say how grateful I feel that I entered Neon and was able to discover the medium during a time when it was possible to learn from a community like this and people in this room. And, you know, Casey was talking about almost kind of like how intimate it can be, learning that this craft, like someone showing you how to move your body, how to hold things, things of that nature. And it can be really hard to do that, do those new things if you're not really comfortable with your teacher, and if your teacher doesn't really believe in you and your right to be there and your ability to succeed. And it's just amazing to have, you know, this community where, you know, if I have a question, I have people to turn to, and I'm not afraid of, you know, my validity being questioned, or like my right to be in the Neon community being questioned. It's just been so amazing to have solidarity, you know, in this group of people.
Thank you, Victoria. Carissa, did you want to say something? I couldn't tell.
Yeah, so for me, you know, being taught by Sarah, it was a very inclusive environment, and also the path to get to it in Alfred. I mean, you have to be very intentional about it. You can't take the Neon course there without having taken, you know, prerequisites for it. So, you know, becoming a part of the Neon community has been, you know, very inclusive. For me, it gives me a lot of confidence that this trade won't die. We have a lot of great artists here and that have been included in the show in the past as well. And, it just gives me a good sense of hope for the future of Neon and the way that it is being taught right now and how it is being passed along, and how nobody here is afraid to talk to other people about Neon and what it entails. And also, advocating for the difference between LEDs, something that could really take over our industry. And, a lot of this stuff coming from China that is mimicking our work and kind of taking away work from us. So yeah, I think with the group of people we have here, really strong-minded individuals, like we can really continue to pass this along and just make this a really inclusive environment and not something that people are scared to approach. Because it can be something very scary, just intimidating in general. We're working with flames and, electricity and stuff. And, the more we educate people on it, the less scared they'll be and the more willing they'll be to want to try it. So.
I want to also
Great.
say that I'm really happy to now have Carissa in the Bay Area, and she's in my studio helping me out. So I'm very pleased, and hopefully she'll have plenty of time in the fires to practice, and looking towards building her own studio.
Sick. Yay for knowledge sharing leadership. Snap, snap, snap. Yeah, I don't want to make this too much about me because this is all about you. But one thing I had the honor, for those that are listening, I had the honor and privilege of being able to travel to the opening reception weekend for this exhibition. And I was so overwhelmed at how empowering it was to see a hot shop floor, a whole glass institution completely infiltrated by like femme, women, and queer-bodied people. Like I had this really emotional reaction, and it was this moment for me where it's like, I think maybe Victoria, Steph, and Sarah Blood are the only folks who've seen me like pre-transformation, and just knowing how long it took for me to get there as an individual, I had this moment where I was both so happy and sad, because like I was like, wow, if I only had something like this when I was like 19 years old. So thank you to all of you. It's been incredible to participate with all of you. I think we can move on to our next question unless anyone else wants to weigh in.
No, I just want to say we were so happy to have you, Reese.
Aw, thanks.
You're a perfect addition.
Thank you. Okay. It's quite a special moment for an institution like the Museum of Glass to put on an exhibition focused on neon. I want to congratulate Meryl for one of her pieces being acquired into the museum's permanent collection. A question for the entire group, and I'm asking this because I'm now recently working in a glass institution. What do you want institutions to understand when exhibiting shows that include neon or acquiring neon works into their collection? And when I say acquiring, I mean like purchasing your works to keep at the institution. What are some things that you want them to know? Jude, I saw your hand first, and Steph.
Hello. I mean, first of all, it's so nice to be back in the group with everyone. It feels like it's been forever, even though it was just a few months ago that we were all in the same room. I mean, I love this discussion. And also I want to say, I really appreciate, Kelsey, that how you opened it and framed it in the context of neon as a craft, and how it does feel like this space that cannot be infiltrated for a number of different socioeconomic reasons. But to your question, Reese, about museums and institutions acquiring or presenting our works, I think regardless of the medium or the craft, there's a responsibility for any institution when they're showing any types of work to truly understand not just the artist, but the concepts and the driving narratives behind the work. There is a responsibility and accountability and agency that comes into place, because it's this symbiotic relationship between artist and institution who's taken on the ownership to present the work to their audience. And so we can all present the very same work and it'll read totally differently in different institutions depending on the context of who it is that's showing our work, the curator's intentions, the audiences that these museums or institutions of knowledge and culture are talking to. And so I think from an institutional level, I just want to stress like the responsibility that they hold when they invite any one of us into these spaces to show and honor our work and the stories in the way that we intended. So that would be my hope for all of these spaces.
Yeah, thank you, Jude, for bringing that up. I think as a curator in this arena, and someone who doesn't only work with NEON, my hope for these institutions is almost less about the technicality of NEON, although Meryl does have a lot of exciting kind of knowledge about that because she just spoke at the Getty Conservation talk about NEON in institutions and permanent spaces, and a lot of exciting things have happened recently with Chris's work, for example. But I think that more than anything else, not only have these spaces not historically had NEON, the craft, but they haven't had a diversity of narratives and therefore artists in their space. And so it is our job as stewards of those narratives and of the craft to ensure that the stories and the people are handled responsibly, and that we're creating a safe space. And so it's definitely that is an evolving craft, if you will, of learning how to, kind of be at the forefront of inviting new narratives into these spaces that have historically haven't had them. And we have some really beautiful and some poignant, but regardless important narratives in the exhibition Redefining Neon Legacy. And it has definitely been an honor and work to ensure that they're held responsibly in that space.
Thank you, Kelsey. Steph, I know you had something you'd like to say. I remember seeing your hand earlier.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, just on the technical side, I'd really love if more institutions would take the effort and energy and money in hiring experts to train their teams in how to handle NEON, how to preserve it, if possible, how to install it. I'm sure we have all experienced institutions calling us up and asking for questions or help or our literal time and labor on installations. I know I've participated in some of those installations with plenty of you. The fact that extra labor is being asked of us where it wouldn't be of plenty of other mediums, and also many times unpaid, let's be frank, is quite frustrating. If an institution wants to show this work and they want to support us and they want to take advantage of our work, they should be initiating those steps in order to install it and handle it properly. I should shout out, some institutions are really good at that. Bergstrom Mahler Museum of Glass in Wisconsin has taken those efforts and done that. And, working with them is a completely different experience than working with some other spaces. And surprisingly, in my own experience, it's smaller spaces that have been taking that initiative as opposed to some larger institutions. So I personally would just love to see that across the board.
I want to chime in also on this technical side. Thank you, Stephanie, for bringing this up, because it's a really good segue into sort of talking a little bit about some SheBend's goals and initiatives as well when it comes to this particular topic, and also to share a glimmer of hope from the aforementioned Getty talk that there are interested people out there in very high places that want to know more about this medium. They want to know how to preserve it. They want to know how to conserve it. And most importantly, they're interested in connecting the bridge between the work that they currently have in their collections, the future of it, and also the artists that are coming into the fold and the young people who are going to be helping them and holding their hand in the future too, right? So there's that glimmer of hope. And, Kelsey and I frequently talk to, whenever we're talking to spaces or venues or institutions where we're showing, we're frequently kind of sharing, that we would like to have opportunities to kind of give a debrief to their art handlers, right? Like, we would love to do a training, a debrief, and share our knowledge of installation for you guys for the future. There are a number of times where we've wanted to sort of initiate a Bay Area wide, boot camp for all of the art handling companies around here to do, to learn all of the different methods of installing neon, so that that can be changed in the future. And I would encourage anybody out there to sort of like, pick up this torch, right? So to speak, and do the same thing wherever they're at. I think that what I've found in at least reaching out to a few people before COVID sort of screwed up our plans is that there is interest in it. It's just, a lot of people don't even really know where to turn to. And so if somebody's kind of knocking on their door and saying like, hey, we'd like to, like, would you be interested in a workshop to pay me to teach your people how to install this stuff? It's definitely knowledge that they're going to need in the future with all of these cool artists coming into the fold. I think that you'll find that people are pretty open to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Go ahead.
Did I see someone?
Kelsey.
Go ahead.
Do you want to go, Casey? Oh, you're muted.
Yay. Yeah, interesting question. What to know to install neon, how to kind of take it to the professional level. And I think it is also still very approachable. I think it's also like you have to develop glass hands, which is like where you're holding something like without any muscle, but like you don't move any of your muscles, so it stays in place. And I think about this a lot because I do professional art handling for all the fairs. And I am lucky enough to be the go-to neon installer. So it's been really fun to kind of see like the back end of that too, the back of house, about how Joseph Kostuth ships his neon, and like, is this the original, and kind of like looking at all of the paperwork on the back end of this stuff. So I get kind of like lost in these little paper trails and like boxes with little bits and bobbles for storage, and like where they put the transformer, and just how everything is kind of arranged together in a compact, safe traveling container. Some so much better than others, I think. But yeah, just having like idealized storage, I think would be nice, because it's really only, I think about it really only being safe on the wall. I'm happy when it's on the wall. And then I can breathe. Like there's no use for air until it's on the wall and it's safe, right? Then you can do the breathing part. So yeah, I think there's a lot of angles in on that question.
Mhm.
And just before Lily, really quickly,
Oh.
I'd just like to say that if you haven't seen Redefining Neon Legacy at MOG, we kind of touch on that curatorially with Casey Lee's piece, How to Install Neon in Space, which is like an amazing, not abstract, but artistic approach to that aspect of neon, right?
Mhm.
That like, that is a really big part of neon. It's not just hanging a painting on the wall, but it's quite literally how to install neon in space. And so we know Casey thinks about this stuff a lot.
Lily.
I think too, like another part of this question outside of like the, technical and like more sorry, my brain's like, oh man, lagging today.
You don't have to
Outside of the like technical applications of neon and this sort of like invisible labor that happens with like installing and creating and shipping too, like I would like to framework that question, like how can museums like this support artists more, and I think that this is like a great first step, like hosting exhibitions with like emerging artists, and but there's still like so many disparities that go into exhibiting in a show like this. I'm sure a lot of us, like our costs were either like even with the shipping or whatever, but there's like so much labor and cost that goes into making a work of art before you ship it to the museum. And you know, I'm more interested in like how these spaces can continuously like go above and beyond, you know, supporting exhibitions and artists like this. You know, bringing in diverse people is like the first step, but you really have to provide like a framework and a foundation for artists to be able to continually succeed in a world like this where you're paying out of pocket for materials and labor and outsourcing and whatever else you do. And add on to that, you know, that there's many of us who are like women in the industry, you know, queer people, you know, people of color, like there's all these additional barriers that happen just to exhibit like a work. And so, you know, things like acquisitions are great. Like they acquired A Piece of Mine as well in that show. And I think
really, congrats. Sorry, I didn't congratulate you earlier.
Thank you. And that's like, you know, one way that museums can support artists like without giving them money. You know what I mean? They can like, they should have been, no offense, I don't mean to like talk shit, but like they should have been involved in this discussion as well. And I know that they were, and they kind of like, I don't know what the issue was, maybe like didn't whatever step up in the way that we hope that they would. But like, I find it interesting, you know, when we frame it as like, oh, it's such a great opportunity. Like, this is such a wonderful thing that they're doing, when really like, this is like what they should have been doing for 20 years, you know? And it's a little frustrating for me, like when I'm a working artist and I'm invited to this opportunity and I get no financial support, like that's really hard, you know, like that is so hard. Like, and I think that there's so many ways that institutions could support artists, and like that's where we really need to push them in that direction. And I don't know, you know, what that looks like, but there's, I mean, like maybe it's paying for extra labor to come install the shows. Like maybe it's, I don't know, paying you to have the panel discussion. Like it doesn't have to be monetary, but I think that's also an important side of this question is like, what should they be doing in these community spaces? And like, how can they continue to like hold space for this and like support spaces for people to come in to like continually be able to participate.
Victoria.
Yeah, I was thinking about how too many institutions think about Neon as kind of just being a selfie magnet to draw people in to see the other art. And, you know, it can be disheartening to be approached in that sort of tone. And then on top of that, not have the financial support. And then on top of that, you know, they're insisting that they're going to install your work, but then they're doing things that are literally damaging your work, you know? And so, you know, I really love when I show at a gallery or museum and someone from that institution comes up to me and says, what is this piece about to you? You know, and has a verbal discussion, even if you emailed your artist statement or what filled out their paperwork or whatever, that one-on-one conversation can be so meaningful. And, you know, everyone in this exhibition, all of the works have such deep layers of complexity and meaning and tenderness and all these different things. And so I think it's really amazing when the people at the institution actually take the time to sort of interview you and figure out what the work is about and figure out what other work it should be shown in conjunction with and things of that nature. And it's surprising how rarely that actually happens.
Super rare.
I will also say that, you know, I can kind of look at Sheben's legacy and like where we've come from, and like where we're going to a certain extent, and like even in our 5-year history, 7-year history. Meryl, help me out here. 5 years since I've been part of it. You know, we've gotten better opportunities, right? Like at first it was whoever would show us kind of, and there was very little funding available. And slowly we're seeing opportunities crop up where there's more, we have more of a choice in like how we can structure exhibitions and how artists are supported within our exhibitions. And that feels like an evolution, and a very hopeful one. And there are, all museums are made differently, and like, there is a dearth of funding for the arts in general. And I think that that's like a larger systemic problem. But there are museums that now we're starting to come across that like they choose to be wage certified, right? So if they have artists exhibiting, they choose to like pay, there's like an agreed upon fee. And so, we're also getting educated in that space, and it feels, again, just hopeful that like museums are choosing to have, whether it's smaller or less frequent exhibitions, so that they can put more concerted funding into supporting artists, into their show budgets. I think that that's our work, right, as producers, as curators, to encourage institutions to jump on that bandwagon, and to also choose to be a part of exhibitions at institutions that do that and are supporting artists in that way.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, everyone. As I'm listening to all of you and thinking about the question I prompted, I'm thinking about what my experience has been like being in institutions where I'm trying to advocate for NEON. And I think maybe something I would want to share with maybe folks who work at cultural institutions who are interested in NEON would be like, I would never sign. My cat is trying to make an appearance. She loves to be the center of attention. I would never, I'm not a professional bender, but what I'm experiencing is, as far as like through a curatorial perspective, I'm usually the one that sits in the room that has like at least a little more knowledge than who's sitting around me. And so what I would need from those people who are listening is like, trust the people who are vocalizing the needs of the community they're trying to steward. And if like, just trust it, right? Like, I think one pattern that I'm noticing is like, folks just think you just slap it on the wall and kind of like wire it up and it's done. But like, there's a lot of care and ritual around how to make sure something's installed safely. And so when you're hearing these people in these spaces that are trying to advocate for that, listen to them. Like, they're not being persnickety. They're not being divas. They're they want the institution to look good and they want these artists to look good. So you got to listen to them. And that's my 2 cents. Shall we move on to the next question? We've kind of touched upon this a little bit, but I would love to hone in on it a bit more. And that is, NEON has often been described as an agent for capitalism. But I think, and I would like to hear from you, your pieces dismantle that assumption. And I'd like to hear how you all think that that's happening or occurring.
I can jump in here. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm very sorry, my cat's also trying to make an appearance. So one of the things that I'm kind of, for the most part, really focused on is trying to make work that doesn't use text. I'm really interested in the conversation between the NEON and different materials for that reason, because I don't want the work to be associated with signage, because that's not what I'm trying to do, and that's not what I'm trying to talk about. And I know that everyone has a different approach to that. But I think initially it was like, I don't have the technical ability to do text, so I'm going to address it in this other way. And then as I've got used to the material, as my skill levels have gone up, and I can actually do that now if I wanted to, I choose not to, because actually for me, it's about the conversation between the NEON and between the other materials. That's the thing that catches my imagination. That's that's the driving force behind my work. Yeah, other people have different ways of working, so I'm now going to mute myself.
Casey?
Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I think it's a good lens to the medium altogether, right? We have a familiarity with it already as this, right? But I think you got to kind of look at that, address it, and see what it's doing, and then harness its powers and, you know, disrupt the system, make unsellable work, you know, maybe you got to make just something that nobody can even buy, and like gift economy and stuff like that. You know, I think there's a lot of ways in outside of the standard like business model of taking a commission for like turning a drawing into an illuminated work, right? Like that is a kind of a one-liner, right? And we use that and we get there as like a skill to develop through sketches and through project development. But yeah, it kind of, I lose a lot of interest for like a drawing translation. I think that's the place to start. And then I think it's the second project. It's the project after you do that first project that you did. That's when you start playing with what you've learned and how you're kind of embodying this sculptural method. And yeah, I mean, it's so interdisciplinary. I think that everybody can kind of click into it in their own way because it hasn't really been hammered out in a, this is exactly how you do it way. I like the individuality of process, the individuality of style, of how people are approaching the tube and the fire, even though it's just two elements, it's like a world of opportunity in those two elements.
I would like to chime in really quick before Steph. I'm sorry. Is my internet okay? Am I a little funky? Am I good? Okay. I want to sort of echo something that one of my teachers told me. His name is Bill Concannon. Some of you are familiar with him. He is wonderful, has been doing it for a very long time, taught me at the Academy of Art. And the first time that I bent, a lot of my first work was text. You know, I was like, this is the mountain to climb. You know, I'm a confrontational person, kind of like, I don't shy away from it. So I'm like, no, I'm going to do it. And the first time I took him like serif letters, it's really funny to look at it now. But what he said about it was, I love it. It's so charming. It looks like you really had something to say and you just needed to get it out. And it's just like, I actually told that, I tell that to a lot of people, but somebody who I told that to, his name is James Akers. You all are familiar with him. He's a very technical person, right? And he told me just the other day, we met for the first time, and he told me just the other day that he thinks about that often. And he thinks about the value that's in that statement often. And I think that there is a very, in my opinion, patriarchal expectation for neon work to be perfect. And I understand the line that we're towing between, as Sarah said earlier, like if you can make a bad painting and it's still a painting, you can't light up a piece if it's not made the way it's supposed to be made, right? It defeats the purpose. But at the same time, there is this area that I love as a curator of seeing work from people who are early in their learning journey and seeing the hand in the work. And, you know, if you didn't put the right size electrodes on, or if you didn't, you know, like smooth this part out to the pattern, or maybe there's some dots from your screen. Like, I don't know. I'm a sucker for that type of stuff because my inclinations as an artist and a teacher is to find the beauty in the imperfection. And I feel like I'm constantly sort of stuck in a dichotomy working in this field, you know, with having those inclinations. But I just try to preach on that whenever I can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Meryl. Steph?
That was really interesting. I should say this is not at all how I approach teaching, but this is just how I approach making my own work. But when making work with neon, unlike some of the other artists, I do heavily rely on Neon's history of signage in order to inform my work. Like that history is what helps me push through my pieces and know what I'm making. But there is always that stress and pressure because I do feel the need for the work to be well made. And, you know, that's certainly gotten better over time. And I also feel the pressure of not having anyone focus too much on the technical aspects of the work. I really want them to focus on the words and how I made the words and the font and the size and the color and the light output and all of that. And I definitely find a frustration in the art world straddling that line because I've had so many curators tell me your work is just a sign. Like, this is not art. And I can understand their perspective from a potentially uninformed position on neon and neon art. But then, you know, from a sign making perspective, that is something that I do. I do fabricate commercial signs. You know, I'm always thinking like, how is my work standing up to the work that I'm making commercially for other people? And for me, I just really try to keep those practices entirely separate because I know that my work is so steeped in that history of signage. And I really appreciate all that history for me and my art practice. But I know that's so different for so many other folks. And I try not to let it influence my students when I'm teaching. I mean, we have the internet, so anyone can see whatever anyone makes, but I definitely make sure not to show any students my work in the process of teaching intentionally, because I want to keep them separate from that idea.
Well, Stephanie, I just want to say about your work, like, I never see it as signage. I see it as poetry. And like, that's like, there's such a huge distinction between the canon of commercial signage. I also run a commercial shop, you know, and the world of art. And and I think this is why neon is kind of in this limbo of like, is it craft? Is it fine art? Is it a trade? Like, nobody knows. It's all three. And like, it's everything at once, you know, and that's what's so beautiful and rich about it, you know, is that you can trace these lineages back. I mean, one of my favorite works of art is Gordon Parks' like photograph of this like, you know, neon sign that says colored entrance. And like me and Meryl have talked about this before. And it's like a Black family I think it was taken in Birmingham actually, or in Alabama somewhere. But like, there's so many undertones to capitalism that's not just signage. Like there are racial undertones, there are, I mean, just it's a vast, I mean, universe of inequity. And I think there's a lot of artists out there who are, you know, brilliantly pointing out this capitalism and its associations to neon. I think Gabriel Rico out of Mexico City is one of the artists who's doing that phenomenally. And you know, like I think there's all of this emphasis on text, but like I think it's much more than that. Like I think like when I make work, you know, I intentionally make a lot of rainbow work in order to like reclaim queer spaces. Like I want to like be so pervasive in spaces that are, you know, that they become like overtly queer and like washed with rainbow light. And like I think there's so many different ways to go about subversing this idea of like capitalism and neon and how they're interconnected. And I think like what all of us are doing is like unique and successful, and it's in their own way, and like going against that idea, because like we're all having these internal conversations about like in our own ways, like about like, is this what I'm like, am I doing this craft? Like, am I doing this like, how am I separating my design practice from my art practice, which like I also battle with a lot. And yeah, I think Sarah's right, or whoever mentioned it earlier, like this medium is not centuries old, like it's 250 years old, and we're just now getting to a point where everyone's realizing that we live in like a post-capitalist hellscape, and like we're all like, it's on all of our minds, you know. Like no one wants this. So, and I think something that's really special about neon is that it can point to all of that at once, you know, and people can push it in so many different directions, and like it needs to be done. And I think that it's the perfect medium to do it. You know, you can't really talk about this with painting, you know what I mean? Like you can't talk about this with bronze sculptures. Like neon, like this is like its existence is founded in an advertisement. And so, you know, how can we like like, I love this question, Reese. Thank you, by the way, for all of your
Mhm.
questions, because
Yeah.
it's so refreshing, like to be like,
You're welcome.
not have someone be like, why neon, you know? And it's like, that's not, you're not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Like, it's anyway.
Thank you for saying thank you. I spent a lot of time thinking about them. Yeah.
It's
Sarah,
the
did
right
you-
question.
Good. Sarah, did you want to make a comment?
I was going to comment about intellectual property, actually. One of the things that I know a number of us have kind of come up against is having our work interpreted as signage, therefore being open source and therefore being free to copy. There's been a lot of instances where like people will take a picture of your work into just a sign shop, and not just a sign shop, that's not what I mean, but like as a sign maker, and say, can you make me one of these? And I have had 3 or 4 different instances where big companies have taken my work wholesale and just manufactured it, mostly the fashion industry, actually. And you know, it's expensive, and they have like a whole team of lawyers, and they are basically stealing from independent artists when they do that. And so at least for me, the thing that I do is kind of work with stuff that isn't easily copyable, I think, or something that is so labor intensive that no one in the fashion industry is going to stick 4,000 dressmaking pins around the outside of a little tube. And so that's kind of like, that's definitely something I'm considering when I'm making work as well.
I don't think that stops them though. I mean, Sarah, your Luna fossils have been reproduced like more than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to comment on like the kind of exhibition as a whole. And, you know, Lily, you touched on it too, that like all of the artists in this show are dismantling neon as an agent for capitalism in their own and unique way. Mostly because, as I said earlier, right, like capitalism has the impact has historically been for white, hetero, male, wealthy people. And so by being able to celebrate narratives that are different, it inherently becomes an agent for something else, right? For illuminating those narratives. And like just to touch on those a little bit, as a maybe encouragement for the artists to talk about their work, but also for people who haven't seen the exhibition. You know, Daniela's work is about cultural memory, right? And having that in neon is incredibly powerful. You know, that kind of struggle between cultural memory and assimilation, and like, wow, what an incredible thing to have in neon with its history. And Stephanie's work, which is like this perfect text, right? Talking about like the femme experience in neon spaces and how visceral that is. When you see Steph's work is incredibly powerful. And, you know, Meryl's work about climate change and the health of our earth, and the feeling you get when you're in her installation, right? And if you've heard Meryl talk about the Repent work, you know, you've heard her say that the first time exhibiting it at Part 2 Gallery was the day that the Bay Area was covered in like this orange smoke, right? And it looked like her installation, right? So these are incredibly visceral concepts that are using neon to replace or take up more space in the world than the historically commercial neon has made. And so whatever it is, you know, the spiritual spaces that Lily and Victoria are making, right? Like there's so much there. And so that's the work, right? The whole exhibition, all of these artists are dismantling the capitalist tool that Neon is by using it to make their stories.
That's beautiful. I have one more question, and I thought we could maybe do round robin style, and I could go in the order of my screen, if that's okay. And then maybe we could do a Q&A. I'm not sure how to do a Q&A on a YouTube live situation. I might need help.
So we do have people who are viewing on the YouTube live, and I'm gonna put it in the chat to, now's the time if anybody wants any questions. We
I
are
have one more question, Meryl. What'd you say?
What's that?
I had one more question, Meryl, but I think I cut you off.
Oh, I'm just kind of telling you about the Q&A. We're on a little bit of a delay for the YouTube stream, so I'm chatting with. I'm just putting it in the chat on the YouTube to say that now is the time for questions, but there's a possibility that we might not have any. I'm not sure. So I'll let you.
Okay. Okay, cool. I can ask the question and then we'll monitor it on YouTube. Okay, sounds like a plan. All right. So my question is, and I think because of how my screen's set up, Daniela, I'm going to start with you. What do you want emerging artists identifying as women, femme, or gender non-conforming to know if they are interested in pursuing Neon?
Well, that they would be welcomed in with open arms. We definitely need way more perspectives in order for the medium to keep churning and growing. We just need to diversify and welcome in these people. And I do agree when someone said that it is an intimidating medium to get into, but there's so many people on this screen who are so eager with love and admiration to share what they make and what they teach. So there are definitely so many resources that all these people on the screen can share to not be scared about reaching out for help.
Thank you, Daniela. Lily?
Oh, I would say just don't give up. Like, just in the face of failure, which you're surely experienced over and over again. And it feels horrible, but just keep going. The learning curve is intense, like, everyone here knows. So yeah.
Thank you. Steph?
I would say there are more opportunities than you think in order to learn, and there are jobs available if that's something that you want to pursue. There are studios and sign shops that are more open than before, and just demand your presence at a space. You're going to find folks who you'll find comfort with, and you won't have to be alone in this community. Like, a support system will emerge, or we will create a support system for you.
Great, thank you. Victoria?
Yeah, earlier I was talking about how amazing it's been to learn from really approachable and kind people like Steph and like Sarah and others in the Neon community that I've been lucky to cross paths with. And so I would, tell someone who wants to learn, I'd welcome anyone to approach me. Like, I think a big goal in me kind of passing the torch to others is to be approachable and to be someone to talk to or to bounce ideas off of. So, I would tell them that, like, I'm there for them, but that, yeah, I agree with what others have said, that there is a growing community that is there for them if they do want to learn and if they do want to push through that steep learning curve. So yeah.
Thank you. Carissa?
Yeah, I would definitely say, use the community. There's plenty of resources. Reach out, don't be afraid. And when you do reach out, advocate for yourself. Don't don't listen to somebody who's trying to put you down if you're trying to enter the industry. You know, there'll be somebody else, if you ask them, that will be opening the door for you and want you there. I think also just the Sheben's website, there's a lot of great resources as well. So I wanted to throw that out there. And also it's just a really rewarding medium, you know, like I think we all know that feeling when like a piece lights up. So don't be afraid. Also, don't be cookie cutter, you know, be expressive, you know, don't be scared of the medium, you know, try new things. I think that's one of the biggest things for me that helped me through my practice was trying things that maybe weren't necessarily the norm. And, you know, whether you fail along the way or not, it's okay because it's the journey that's going to get you there. And I think, you know, this medium in the end, if you do stick with it, you'll forever be a badass. So.
Great, thank you. Casey.
Yeah. I think femmes and queer folk and gender nonconforming, your people are in Chicago. You need to join the Chicago School of Neon that's being born out here. Because everybody still wants access, wants to build a shop, wants to kind of work in the community environment. And I think that's already kind of embedded into this direction that we're after here in Chicago. I can say here in Chicago because I'm here right now for the time being. But yeah, it's been a privilege to kind of teach through the Art Institute and meet a bunch of different kinds of students and just share in everyone's experiments in our little basement. But I also know that there's a growing community of people leaving these courses looking for studio access, looking to build shops. So if it's, you know, I think a lot of that future kind of lives with the youth, right? And like seeing where that can develop and working together and kind of building something together. So I say we're your people here.
Beautiful, thank you. Jude?
It's really tough to follow all of these answers. You guys took all of the things I wanted to say, but essentially, in essence, I think just be stubborn. You're going to hear no a lot. You're going to be rejected a lot. And I don't think this is just a Neon thing. I think it's just the arts space in general. Take that stubbornness and be disciplined about it. You're going to fail, especially when it comes to neon and glass. Glass is not a very forgiving material when you're first learning to ride the bike. You have to kind of push through. And then there's this moment when you turn the corner and it all makes sense and it all becomes more intuitive and you build this muscle memory. So be stubborn and push through that until you make it around the corner. Yeah. Be stubborn, be disciplined. That's what I would say.
That needs to be on a t-shirt. Be stubborn, be disciplined. Nice. Sarah Blood. Also, Sarah Blood, I'm really sorry. It's just, I can't not call you Sarah Blood. It's always going to be Sarah Blood.
It's fine. There's usually other Sarahs in the room, so I don't, you know, it helps to clarify. Yeah, all of the above, really. There will be so much failure. I think the thing that I would recommend is keep your first bends, keep your first splices, because you will fail so much, you won't actually be able to see or recognize the development that's happening. So you keep those first things and you put them somewhere and you put a date on them, and they are precious artifacts. And when you need a reminder to keep showing up, you go look at those bends and you go look at those splices and congratulate yourself for being a badass and making progress. Because it's hard. It's hard. It is really hard, and it takes a lot of time, and most of that time is on your own, and most of that time is messing up. Yeah, but keep at it.
Great, thank you. Kelsey?
That we're depending on you, that we need your perspective to take up space, not only as a student, but as an artist, and then hopefully as a teacher, and maybe even in institutions if that's your path. But you're crucial to the legacy that we're attempting to redefine.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kelsey. And last but certainly not least, Meryl.
I'm just trying to manage this streaming thing. So far, I don't see any questions, but we are on a crazy delay. So I just want to put it out there that if people don't have a chance to have their questions answered live, you can always email us at info@shebens, and we can we're probably going to do features of this on the Instagram, and we can sort of answer questions on the Instagram or figure out a way to do that. But to answer the question, I think what I'll say is just from the Shebens end, please just reach out. I think that there's, early on, there was some confusion around kind of what our formulation is, and anyways, maybe we don't always do the best job at proactively reaching out to everybody in the community and making it clear that we are an inclusive space and that there are no members, you're not in or you're out. Every person who's in this space who has questions or wants support, reach out and, share your work and ask questions. We're here for that. So I just kind of want to make that clear from the Shebens angle. And I think that that's kind of the most important thing for me to say.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Those are my questions. I also am not seeing anything in the chat at this time. But I wanted to thank you all for welcoming me in and sharing space with me. It's a real honor and a privilege. So thank you. I think we can close it out.
Thank you, Reese.
Thank you. Jazz hands. Jazz
Thank
fingers,
you,
jazz hands.
Reese.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.